Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our October 2024 chapter meeting. We hope that you've taken advantage of the many opportunities that were offered in the September meeting to get out the vote, influence the election, and get people to vote for Kamala and the Waltz ticket and the down ballot races. We have a month till the election, and I don't have to tell you why we need to get out the vote. The topic for today is State of the Unions. As you know, our union doesn't work in a vacuum. We're part of a statewide and national, I don't know, coalition. It's not a coalition, state and national parent unions, let's say. And so just as the PSC doesn't work completely in a vacuum, our chapter doesn't work in a vacuum either. We work as other chapters do within the PSC. So today we're going to hear from Ruth Milkman, who's, hasn't, she's still comes back every fall, and we very much appreciate that. She's going to talk about the national picture, and then James will talk about our union and what we've been up to, and he's going to introduce to us a newly hired executive director, Malini Kadambi. And then a little later on, I'm going to talk to you briefly about our chapter. So Ruth, are you ready to go? Do I have to ask her to unmute? Ruth Milkman, you with us? Ava, do you see Ruth?
I see her, but I think she's
Oh,
muted.
okay. I think I just was able to unmute. First, it said that you had to do it or something.
Okay, all right. So it's great
May
to
I
see
share?
you.
Okay, may I share my screen as well?
Absolutely.
See if that works. It looks like it. Okay, very good.
Okay, thanks.
Can people see the?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Oh God, it's not gonna let me, I think. Let's see. Oh yeah. All right, I may have to just talk. What a drag.
No, maybe we can help you. I mean, Ava, is there something we can do?
I could send you the PowerPoint, I suppose, and then have you show it. It seems like I'm in my office. I'm not where I usually am, and I'm not sure it's gonna let me. You can't see the screen, right?
No, maybe she needs to be a co-host on Ava. Maybe that's the
No,
problem.
I think the problem is on my end. If I send it to one of you, could you show
Yeah.
it?
Send
Yeah,
it to Ava. Give her
I'm
your
gonna
address.
put my email in the chat. Hold on a second.
Okay, I'm really sorry.
Okay,
There's always something, right?
we will be patient.
I mean, I could just talk, but I think it's easier if people can see some of the graphics.
Think so. Okay. Okay, so Ava put her email
in the chat. Okay, let me try to send you this. I'm so sorry for the delay, everybody. Okay, it's on its way to you, Ava, with no subject line. Send anyway. I just sent it. Okay, so while we're waiting for that, let me just say a little bit by way of background. I think, well, some of you have heard these talks before. Every year at the School of Labor and Urban Studies, we put out this report called the State of the Unions, with whatever year it is. This year, obviously 2024. And it's kind of a report on the current state of, like the title suggests, of union membership and sometimes some other topics in New York City, New York State, and the United States. So that's what we did this year. And each year we also have a special section that's kind of, a spotlight of some topic. So this time we did that on recent organizing and NLRB elections. Oh, good. And now you can
Okay,
see my
great.
PowerPoint.
Terrific.
Right. So perfect. So Anne, this is great. Could you go to, that's just the title page. Oh, I should mention my co-author, Joseph Vandernaut, who's a advanced graduate student at the Graduate Center who works with me on this, has done it for the last several years. Okay, can we go to the second slide? Thank you. So I think you're all aware of this, that public approval, as the Gallup people call it, of labor unions has been rising recently and is, you know, much higher than it's been for a long time. As you can see, 70% of the people they poll say they think unions are a good thing. So that's one thing that's changed recently. And then the next slide shows that this is particularly true of young people. And it's even more so among college-educated young people, which is important in what's been happening recently because they are the leading edge of a lot of the new organizing that's been happening. That is college-educated young folks. Can we look at the next slide? So this just shows that, I mean, this is a little bit of a complicated graph, but you can see that it basically shows that Gen Z, which means people born, it's the most recent generation the marketing folks have identified. So they're a little younger than millennials. And their approval rating for unions is even higher than it was for the generation most of us are in, that is baby boomers. At the time we were their age. So, you know, this is always a debate in the discussions of this topic. What is it, just a product of them being young, or is it a genuine change, you know, historically? And in this case, it seems to be a little bit of both, but definitely, you know, there's evidence that they really are more pro-union than we were when we were their age. So that's significant. Next slide, please. Thanks. Okay, so that's the good news in a way. There's a lot more public support for unions and a lot more organizing happening, as you'll see in a minute, and also more, you know, a whole cadre of young people who are interested in labor, which is something we haven't seen for a while. Meanwhile, however, all of that has been insufficient to really move the needle on union density. Union density just means the share of all wage and salary workers who are members of unions. So this shows you for the last 20 years that union density has been, well, basically in a long, slow decline in the, this is just the private sector, this graph. I'll show you the public sector in a moment. And in the country as a whole, it's 6% of all private sector workers are members of unions, meaning 94% are non-union. New York is a little bit better off. There it's about double the national level. And as you can see in the city, there's been a slight uptick and it's 13.5% of the workforce. So that's better than 6, but it still means that, you know, over 80% of workers are not union members. So we have a lot of work to do in that respect. And despite all the activity you've all heard about, you know, Amazon, Starbucks, the University of California, et cetera, that's all important and interesting and exciting, and yet it has not moved the needle much on any of this. Can we have the next one? Oh, well, it's just what I just said. So, whoa. Oh, okay. I don't know why that URL is there in the middle, but the reason for that is that at the private sector companies where organizing has been happening recently, the companies involved, you know, Amazon most notoriously, have resisted unionism at every turn. So in Staten Island back a few years ago, as you may remember, on April Fool's Day, there was this spectacular NLRB election, which the union won by a very large margin, and there is still no contract or even negotiations for that site. And Starbucks is a little different. There are negotiations, but they're dragging on. Trader Joe's, Apple, these other stores that, you know, iconic brands that have unionized, where workers have voted to unionize recently, have not, you know, gotten anywhere in terms of actually reaching a collective bargaining agreement. And the delay tactic, which we know is happening in other arenas too, like with our former president delaying his legal fate. You know, this is very effective, despite the fact that we have a very active and progressive head of the NLRB, Jennifer Abruzzo, despite the rising public support for labor that I showed you some evidence of a little while ago. You know, the delaying tactic is pretty effective. Now, there is a sort of silver lining here, which is that in private sector settings where workers are difficult to replace, think of interns in residence or workers in museums who here in New York have been organizing very actively recently, or journalists. Unlike a Starbucks barista or an Amazon warehouse worker, it's not easy for employers to just hire someone off the street to replace a striking medical resident or a nurse or a museum worker. And so those folks have had more traction in actually going beyond just winning elections and actually winning contracts. So, you know, this is not a new story, but in general, if workers are hard to replace, that makes it much more difficult for, especially in this environment where the labor market is historically, you know, at a very tight level. That is, it's hard to find new workers at all, especially in fields that require a lot of training. So there's been more success, and that includes our industry, so-called. I'm talking about the private sector part of it now, that is graduate student workers and adjuncts who've been very actively organizing, and they are winning contracts. So that's the good news. But the stuff you hear the most about, the Amazon, Starbucks, et cetera, is not happening. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, there was a little note that the activity in all these places has been led by young people, and especially college-educated young people. Now, the public sector is a happier story. Their union density is basically flat. It hasn't increased, but it hasn't dramatically declined, although you see in New York, it has a little bit declined. But, you know, it's way, way higher here in New York. 2/3, roughly, a little less than that now, of public sector workers are union members, including us, of course. So that's you know, and even nationally, it's about 1/3 of all workers. So that's a whole different story. And the reason is simple. Why? For the contrast between public and private, I'm sure you all know this, that the employer resistance that we see in the private sector is, let's just say, milder than in the public sector. It's not non-existent, but there isn't the same incentive to, you know, prevent unionism or destroy unions where they exist, though it's not like employers are that friendly, as we're seeing in our own union negotiations right now for the new contract. But still, they're not, you know, it's different from Amazon. Next slide, please. Why has union density declined somewhat in New York in the public sector? There are a couple, I mean, we don't really know the answer from the research we did, but I'll just tell you the obvious possibilities. One is the delayed effects of the Janus decision, the Supreme Court decision a few years ago that made it illegal to have agency fees, that is, to have workers pay representation fees to unions, even if they don't join as members. So, and during the pandemic, especially, it was not that easy to sign up new members when everybody was locked down. And the other thing is, I don't know, this may be obsolete this point, but since the graph showed you a decline over a couple of years, you know, during the pandemic lockdown period, as you all remember, a lot of people left the city. And the data in our report, I should have said this before, are from the US Current Population Survey. And so when we say there are X number of union members in New York City, that is based on the residents of New York City, people who report to the Census Bureau that they live here, not that they work here. So of course, some people who live in New York work elsewhere, and many people who live in New Jersey work in New York or on, you know, outside the 5 boroughs on Long Island or whatever, and they don't show up in these data. So that's another possible reason why we're seeing that small decline, but it's pretty modest anyway. Really, the trouble is in the public sector primarily. Can we keep going to the next slide? Okay, so this report, which the link will be in the last slide if anyone wants to see it. You know, it's online and available to anyone interested. I'm sort of racing through this because I was just given 20 minutes, so pardon me, but it does include a sort of spotlight on recent organizing, that is organizing that led to elections since 2020. And there has been, as you can see on the right end of the slide, a substantial uptick in organizing since the pandemic, basically. Notice that the level is still modest compared to, say, 2010 when it was higher, or if you go back further, 2002. You know, it's the number of election petitions is up relative to 2016 or something, but not, you don't have to go back very far to see it be just as high. But still, the win, and then the win rate is also up. Although again, if you go back to the 20 years ago, it was similar. But still, there's a lot of activity. And we separated out in the report the Starbucks win, since there are hundreds, there's about 500 now who have unionized, and so that's a lot of elections, even though it's very small numbers of workers in each. But just so you can see, that is part of what's happening, but it's not the main thing. The next one, please. Now, nationally, and this is just showing a few major cities where there's been a lot going on. A lot of what's happening has actually been in higher education. So if you look at Philadelphia and Boston, especially, that is the case. More than half of the new organizing has been in the higher ed sector. That is not true here in New York. It's a small part of the total. The next slide, please. Now, this shows, just for New York City, a breakout by union affiliate. And this includes both when employers voluntarily recognize a union and when there's an election that's, usually the opposite, where they're resistant to it. So you might wonder what this top one is. It's a very peculiar example of, well, I guess I should be careful about the language I use. This is a union that has friendly relations with some home care worker agencies, and the employers, most of whom are represented by 1199 in New York. But this union, some employers have voluntarily recognized as the representative. So this big number of 3,616 workers is based on that. And so that's a kind of weird exceptional case. If people want to know more, if there's time in Q&A, I'm happy to say more about it. But notice the big players here is kind of who you'd expect. The UAW, which has been very active in organizing nonprofits, museums, some higher ed as well. The SEIU has been active, Starbucks Workers United, and the usual suspects here apart from that top one. Next slide, please. Oh, okay, I guess that's it. I kept to 20 minutes, more or less. So you can just Google it if this is easy, if this is difficult to download. But like I said, if you want all the gory details, and there are, there's much more than I had time to share with you just now. It's all available, as are the previous year's reports. So thanks.
Thank you, Ruth. I don't think you even used your full.
Oh, okay. Well, whatever. Okay.
But I think what we're going to do is we'll go to James, and then we'll do the Q&A for both of you together, so you have some time to catch your breath. So
Okay.
where's our wonderful president, James Davis?
I'm here.
You're here. Okay. So you're going to talk to us about PSC and introduce Melanie.
Great. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I
I
don't
don't know
see
if
you.
Melanie has joined the meeting yet, so maybe I'll save my introduction of her until my remarks are finished. Okay, I'm being spotlit. Good grief.
Right.
Great. Come and help us all. Listen, it's really, really good to see you all, and I'm so happy to follow Ruth again, because it's always just a really important context to understand what's happening in the PSC in relation to the analysis that Ruth and her team do every year. And it's great always to see what's going on and coming out of our amazing School of Labor and Urban Studies. So Ruth, thank you for that. I was taking notes, and your invitation to hear all the gory details, I can't resist. And I want to go back and look through the rest of the report and ask you for some gory details, but some really fascinating things I think that are going to resonate with some of the observations that I want to share with you all today. So I'm going to try to keep my remarks brief and make sure that folks have an opportunity to ask me any questions or share any comments that you may have. Can I just start though by thanking the Retiree Executive Committee and as a chapter chair for inviting me and also for the work that you're always doing on behalf of the retirees. We also have to thank the retiree members of the Executive Council of the PSC who are, I don't know if they're on today's call, but you guys know Nancy Romer and Marva Lilly are hardly retired because we work them all the time as members of our executive council, and their experience and insight is really valuable to all of us in the elected leadership. So thank you, Retiree EC. Thank you, Marva and Nancy. Some of you may have attended some of the decarbonization sessions that the Environmental Justice Working Group has been doing. I think there have been about 4,000 of them, if I can keep up, in this month alone. Nancy's deployed right now on the electoral front, but I think she might be on this call. So anyway, thank you all for that. And over the course of my discussion today, I just want to put in a little bit of a plug. You're going to hear me make reference to a few of the many different committees that the PSC has. And, I know that in retirement, a lot of you remain active in all kinds of interests that you have. And the PSC committees are just one way of, staying active and lending your experience and your expertise to advancing various kinds of progressive agendas. But I want to invite you all to, if you don't do this already, to see the committee work that the PSC does as an opportunity to stay connected, obviously, to other folks from CUNY, but also to advance the important work that we're doing here at the union. So let me start at the risk of the most obvious thing, saying that the PSC and I think all of us are very engaged in the high stakes that is the November 5th election. We have obviously our legislation committee is sort of the most direct way to be involved. And I know a lot of folks on this meeting are involved already in the legislation committee. Our legislation committee is phone banking. They are working with NYSET on some of the most high stakes congressional races. Folks are writing postcards and doing all kinds of GOTV work. And I know I'm probably just, bringing coals to Newcastle or whatever the expression is in telling you that no stone can be left unturned, mixing all kinds of metaphors in November and November 5th. And not just at the national level where, I'm sure I don't need to tell anybody here how high the stakes are there, but also who's the Speaker of the House is to some extent in the hands of New York because of what happened in the last round and the way the Democrats lost so many seats that we should have won in New York State. So the other thing I want to mention is that our national affiliate, the AFT, has a lot of resources and is deploying any of us, any PSC member who, has time to do this can be deployed for 1 week, 2 weeks, or even, a 1-day deployment. If you go to aftvotes.org, you can just say, where can I go? There's opportunities to go, especially to Pennsylvania, Ohio. I'm forgetting some of the other swing states that have been identified. I don't think you can get deployed to Arizona, but you can probably find out how to get deployed to Arizona if you want to. But this is really important. I mean, everything, including public higher education, hangs in the balance. Everything around labor hangs in the balance. Locally here in the New York City area, there is, how should I put it, an incredible amount of controversy and unease about the path forward in the city government. It seems like every time, you turn on the internet, there's a new resignation. I just saw a new one of the Banks brothers, tendered their resignation this morning. We will need, as a union, to make our voices heard in terms of who the next mayoral administration is going to be. And a lot depends on, obviously, whether there's going to be a special election. It's very hard to imagine this current mayor, um, hanging on through the spring for, a standard election. But we need to be prepared no matter what. You all know it's a crowded field. It's a crowded field that actually includes a lot of candidates who have a pretty strong record of supporting the students at the City University of New York, supporting the PSC. So we have our work cut out for us, and it's very unsettled right now, right? What that field looks like. So I can come back to any of that, but let me just press ahead to a few other things that I think you'll want to hear about or ask about. One, I want to speak about sort of the health of the Professional Staff Congress. So one measure of our health, and Ruth alluded to this in her presentation, is our level of union membership. And you all know that when we saw the Janus decision coming on the horizon, I won't, go all the way down the rabbit hole, but we really tooled up to fight. Well, first, the case that we thought was going to come that we avoided, which was the Friedrichs decision. And that was averted. But then we knew that the right to work folks and everybody else was going to continue to look for cases that they could bring forward. And they finally got the Janus decision. And we did a lot of work to inoculate and to ramp up our membership work to make sure that the Janus decision didn't cut our legs out from under us. And it worked. But the long game that the right wing has been playing, right, has also kind of done its nasty long-term work. And Ruth mentioned it before, and it was, accelerated by the pandemic, which was to try to erode, over the longer term, erode support and raise the question among people who are getting hired in the public sector. Do I really need to join a labor union? Is that really where my, hard-earned money needs to go? So what we've done in the PSC is really worked closely both with NYSET and with our chapter chairs at making sure that when folks are hired, that we have a touch, and we have a second touch and a third touch with them when they join as employees, that they also join the union. What has that looked like in terms of net for us? We have, in calendar year 2024, we have signed up roughly 700 new PSC members, which is great news. The problem is that people also either leave CUNY or, how dare they, retire. And so what we need to do, right, people deserve to be able to retire. And so what we need to do, right, is to net out an increase over time in PSC members. And I see that Malini just joined the Zoom. And so when she speaks, she'll also amplify this point. She's been thinking hard and working hard in her short time already as executive director to develop some systematic plans for our organizing staff and all of our members to continue to do the work of outreach to new employees and to not so new employees who haven't joined the union. Because where we're at right now is 88% in full-time of our full-timers are members in total, and around 60% of our part-timers are members. That 60% is actually up a little bit from where we were a year ago, but we have a lot of room for improvement and a need for improvement in those numbers. And we have a lot of room and need for improvement on the full-timer numbers as well. Just to give you a sense of this, that 88% has been kind of steady over the past year, despite the fact that we have added 700 PSC members in calendar 2024. So that is because at the same time we are reaching people and signing up new members, we also have people leaving and retiring, and folks like yourselves have done a very good job in making sure that when people retire, it doesn't mean that they are no longer PSC members. We have a huge retiree chapter and growing, which is important, and we need to do that. But our really critical work is on making sure we get to every new member. So so that's something, one kind of barometer of the health of the union. I think our membership is strong, but it needs to be even stronger. And I want to say something sort of about the health of the university, because the health of our agency is also one measure, not the only one, but one measure about the challenges that we face, right, as a labor union. And I want to be really clear about the challenges that I've come to you to speak about before, which is enrollment is a critical piece of how this university is doing, because it's something that triggers responses from our administration. And I think one encouraging kind of benchmark is that for the second year in a row, enrollment at the City University is up this fall. And that's important. For the second year in a row, there's overall enrollment increase at CUNY. And it's pretty uniform across the colleges. It's not up uniformly and at every single campus. There's a few campuses that are down this fall from last fall, but the overall trend is clear, and that in some ways it's very significant. University-wide, the full-time equivalent enrollment at CUNY is up over 3%. Doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a pretty significant increase over 2023, and that includes FTE enrollment increases at both the senior colleges, the comprehensives, and the community colleges. Now, as I said, there's some exceptions to that and some colleges that are still struggling, but the rebound post-pandemic is very important in terms of vitality of the university. And to put this in context, we really were struggling. I mean, we as a labor union were struggling to deal with and to respond to the university's reaction to enrollment declines during the pandemic and after. They really imposed a kind of shock doctrine, policy, those of you who are familiar with the Naomi Klein phrase, response to the pandemic, right? Never let a good crisis go to waste, to coin the Rahm Emanuel phrase. They saw in fiscal 2023 some $40 million in recurring savings, and then doubled down and tripled down in fiscal 24 and said very explicitly, we need to close a gap across this university of $128 million in operating funding. That's a huge amount, right, of money. And where is that going to come out of? They can't close that gap mostly through new revenue. They mostly sought it out in trying to lay off our members, trying to contract the number of courses that they were scheduling and increase the enrollments in the classes. So we went through huge destabilization and real battles in trying to save our members' jobs and trying to push back against measures like cutting the number of classes that our students can take, increasing the class sizes. So it's encouraging to see that enrollment is coming back. It also takes away one of the arguments that we sometimes heard from legislators when we went to Albany or when we went to City Hall and said we need an increased investment in CUNY. We need a new deal for CUNY, right? And some of the tepid responses that we would sometimes get was, well, it's hard to be investing more in CUNY when you have a contracting base of student enrollment. We certainly didn't accept that argument, but that's an argument that is no longer so easy for legislators or anybody else to make when it's very clear we're rebounding from the pandemic. I want to get into a couple of, and I know my time is short, I want to get up to a couple of critical pieces, which is contract negotiations and health, city health. I wanted to just tick off something, couple of PSC victories that have been very important in recent months. I think some of you might be aware of, I think are really important if you don't know about them already. We, along with our allies, I would put it this way, in faculty governance, fended off an attack. I don't think there's any other way to characterize that, an attack on governance through the bylaws. There was an attempt in the spring to really erode some very critical elements that are formalized and enshrined in the bylaws and the manual general policy about what department chairs and department personnel and budget committees have authority to do as far as scheduling classes and other features really of faculty governance. We pushed back at the bargaining table. UFS and other local governance leaders pushed back really in similar ways in against some of what the Office of Academic Affairs and the Chancellor were looking to do. And as a result of that pushback, they not only couldn't take the vote that they wanted to make in the spring around some of these really dramatic changes to governance, things like imposing deans and provosts in areas that previously they had very limited authority. Also redesignating college presidents as chief executive officers rather than, principal academic officers, things like that. So they had to push that board meeting beyond the spring and into the fall. And in the process, they went back and really removed a lot of the most severe and draconian adverse kinds of proposals. And they came to the bargaining table with us and had a session where we made a series of recommendations as the labor union so that it didn't, so that the changes they sought to make would preserve the collective bargaining procedures that were in place in our CBA. So they have really retreated from some of the most egregious proposals. And I think that's a huge victory for faculty governance and for the union. The other thing I wanted to mention was coming out of the online experience of the pandemic, and I'll just be brief about this, we won a decision so that 4,000 of our members would be paid for the training that they received during the pandemic so that everybody could receive at least $900 for the training that they got in the instructional staff received in terms of online teaching. And the reason that that was significant is that some people were getting paid. You guys remember how crazy it was during the pandemic and with teaching. Everybody was pivoted online on a dime. Some people were told to get training. Some people said, go do it if you want to do it. Some people got paid, some didn't. People were getting paid different amounts who were getting paid. And we filed a grievance on that and got a ruling in the late spring, early summer, so that there was a uniform baseline payment of $900 for everybody who received training for online instruction. Probably not enough, but it's very important that we got that floor put in and that everybody who was involved in that grievance, whatever their rank or their title, was entitled to that minimum. All right, let me just cut to the chase. I want to say something about where we're at in contract negotiations and on the healthcare front. We're at a really critical point in the contract negotiations. And if you hear my voice breaking a little bit, it's because we are now 19 months into working on an expired contract. We've had 32 bargaining sessions. We have our 33rd bargaining session coming up tomorrow. It has been a slog. CUNY management never does things quickly in this process, but they have particularly dragged some things out. But we have gotten more momentum and more movement from management over the summer and now heading into this fall. And our goal is to close out a strong settlement this fall, preferably before the November 5th elections, because I don't know about you, but I don't want to pin my hopes on the polls, right? I mean, we do not really want to be negotiating a public sector labor contract. I mean, God forbid, I don't want to say it out loud, but under Trump 2.0. So we're pushing as hard as we possibly can to at least get the economics nailed down. I don't know whether we're going to get there, but we're going to do everything that we can and push the university. So I want to say a little bit about that, but we've had a lot more progress. We've made progress on some things that are really important to our members, like getting at least one step raise with any promotion or reclassification, getting progress on some baseline around remote work, getting progress around adjunct job security, tough issues, getting, progress on welfare fund contributions. And we have made zero concessions along the way to be able to do that. But the main, and there's a ton of open issues that we need to make more progress on. But the main thing is that CUNY came to the bargaining table in late March with an opening economic offer that was insufficient. It was a serious offer, but it was totally insufficient. And they have not moved off of it since March 27th. So our push right now, and we could really use your support, everyone's support, is to try to move them to give us an improved economic offer. We did a raucous and I think very effective picketing action outside our last bargaining session, outside CUNY Central on September 24th. But we're ramping up for an action on October 21st outside of John Jay College at the next Board of Trustees public hearing. We have been very active. Some of you have joined us at public hearings. They're a very good opportunity. We did a disruptive public hearing action with hundreds, I don't know how many hundreds of our members in the Bronx in the spring. We're looking at October 21st to also do a disruptive action. I think, Ava, you have a link to that. Put the RSVP to that October 21st action in the chat. It's amazing to have the support, and we always do, from our retiree members. You guys know how important it is, especially when you get to the point like this where we're, coming up on 19, 20 months without a contract. You know how important it is to all of us, all the in-service members, to try to push the university. So please join us if you can. Some of us are going to be engaged on that day in an action that risks arrest. We understand if you are not in a position to do an action that, a civil disobedience action that risks arrest, but we know that many of you have participated in the past in those actions. And so that the PSC has been able to push through and to turn corners in various kinds of struggles, not just contract, but including contract negotiations, to puncture through the intransigence of management in various ways. So I hope that you'll join us on October 21st. Say something about where things stand in health insurance and what the PSC's program and forward-looking posture is around city health insurance. So one thing, we've spent a lot of time in these rooms, and you all have, around retiree health insurance. And so I won't repeat a lot of what folks probably already know, but you know that in court, the Organization of Public Service Retirees has prevailed multiple times in lawsuits against the city. And the PSC contributed an amicus brief in one of those recent, at this point, not so recent, but more recent lawsuits. And at this point, it looks like the Medicare Advantage contract between the city and Aetna is dead in the water. And it does not look like there's a path to reviving that contract. Now, the city has filed appeals, but the lower court ruling in the two major appeals were so extensive and thorough that it's very hard to see how the city comes back and tries to revive a contract with Aetna. And frankly, if that were to happen and somehow the appellate court or the Court of Appeals that have these two you know, where those appeals are now sitting. If they were to do that, Aetna would have to rebid basically because it's been so long. So it's hard to see that. I think it's great news. I mean, I don't see retiree health, the status quo, changing in the foreseeable future. So the other kind of live issue has been the negotiated acquisition for a successor to the Emblem GHI Comprehensive Benefits Plan. And there too, there's been very little news and very little movement because there's a kind of a stalemate at this point between the folks who are negotiating from the Municipal Labor Committee and the city and the finalists in that contract, which is Emblem is one of the finalists and Aetna is another one of the finalists. But the parties can't agree on which of the bids to recommend. And meantime, City Hall has imploded. And so there's very little movement on the active health insurance front either. But I want to say where we are in this and how we're positioning ourselves as the PSC to move through this and push for what we think we need and what we think the workers of New York City and the working class of New York City needs. So one is around member education. So a couple of the folks who have been working in our healthcare working group developed a document that some of you may have seen already. And I don't know, Ava, if you have a link to myths and facts. If you don't, I can drop it in. We have a really important myths and facts about New York City employee health insurance document. And that is a piece of member education that's very important in terms of getting out in front of whatever is recommended, through the MLC City negotiations. It's on our what's happening in retiree healthcare page, even though technically it's not retiree health because that's been the site of so much healthcare stuff. The other thing I want to mention, and several folks on this meeting have been involved in this, is that our Social Safety Net Committee has been making presentations in various chapters throughout the late spring and into the fall. And I think there's several scheduled going forward. And I know that folks like Eileen Moran and Lorraine Cohen and Jim Perlstein and Len Rodberg can talk more either here or elsewhere about what Social Safety Net can do and is doing in terms of member outreach and member education. That's really important also because whatever happens within and whatever timeline there is from the Municipal Labor Committee, it's going to be really critical that our members understand, it's so complex, what any successor to a comprehensive benefits plan would look like for our union. And I know that our folks also from the PSC Community Welfare Fund are very tuned in to that. I continue to advocate, so I am your representative on the Municipal Labor Committee. I serve on the steering committee, and what I continue to advocate for there is better transparency and a better process than we saw in the rollout of the Medicare Advantage process, which was basically no transparency whatsoever, right? We couldn't talk about any potential conflicts until it was a fait accompli. And of course, that engenders lots of concern and suspicion. Real quick footnote on this, if anybody has questions about what's going on in the negotiations between Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center and Anthem, I know Bonnie, I see Bonnie is on this meeting. She could probably also talk about this as well, but I know that MSK sent out a very concerning letter basically saying we may now no longer be in network for Anthem, which is, formerly Blue Cross Blue Shield hospital. I think that there's less cause for alarm, and I hope some of you received a letter from Claire Levitt in City OLR trying to address where things stand in those negotiations. But I just want to say as a bottom line that anyone who is already receiving treatment or has received treatment through at MSK, that your coverage is not at risk. And there's more to say about that, but I want to just put that out there. In terms of PSC moving forward, and I'll wrap up because I'm sure I'm already over time. We are really committed to trying to address whatever is going on between the city and the MLC. There's a lot to talk about there, but we know in the PSC that there are underlying issues that are political and policy issues that are driving what's going on between the MLC and the city. We need to push for around hospital pricing because that's a really important driver. We need to be able to push the city to expand the resources that they have around their own healthcare operations. The city spends $13 billion a year around healthcare, and they only have a handful of people on staff with any healthcare expertise. And they don't sufficiently advocate and push and in their negotiations with hospitals. So that's a role the PSC and our members can play in pushing the city around those two fronts. We are a part of the Coalition for Affordable Hospitals. That's an initiative that's really being led and driven by 32BJ. So that's a big front. It's not the only thing we can be doing, but it's an important kind of big tent driver of public and private sector unions around hospital pricing, transparency, and price controls. Two members of our healthcare working group have also been tapped to participate in a statewide NICET task force around health insurance equity statewide. That's important. That's Barbara Caress and Carl Kronbusch. And then, I want to just point out that even though it's very hard to figure out how to navigate this moment of instability in the city government, there is an opportunity within that instability to push our agenda and to have conversations that point out what I mentioned before about the absolute lack of healthcare capacity within the city, to push our agenda of having the possibility of the city self-insuring. Lots of municipalities do self-insurance. We want that conversation to be happening at the city level. Our basic premise is that we know healthcare costs are increasing for the city, but they're not actually increasing at a rate or a level that's higher than healthcare costs generally, and that workers and retirees should not be bearing the burden of those increased costs. So we're going to be having those conversations with whoever is a candidate for mayor. The legislation committee always engages, as a lot of you guys know, in screening conversations with mayoral candidates. And in the same way that the Medicare question was a key question in our previous screeners for candidates for citywide office, the healthcare issue is going to continue to be prominent in our conversations with candidates for mayor. Let me stop there. There's, of course, more going on, but I fear that I've gone on too long, but I wanted to make sure I touched on some of the healthcare issues before I stopped. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, James. Are you going to now introduce our new executive director?
Let me do that. The amazing Malini is here. Some of you know that we were without an executive director and with an interim executive director who was also serving as our associate executive director for several months. And it was extremely challenging for the organization. And really, we couldn't be more fortunate than we are to have hired somebody as talented and as experienced, and somehow nevertheless as young, with an entire career ahead of her. We hope all of it here with the PSC. Amazing already in her 1 month at PSC, which is Malini Kanemi Daniel, and I'm going to let her tell you more about herself. Malini, are you with us? She's saying host needs to unmute.
She's a host, so she can unmute herself.
Bonnie, can you make sure you made her a host?
Now
Thank-
she's a co-host, okay.
Great, I'm unmuted. Thank you. Thanks so much, James, for that introduction. And thank you, Anne, for inviting me. I'm very excited to meet all of you on Zoom and hope to meet you in person very soon. So I just will give you a couple minutes about my background. I've been working most recently with SEIU for over 20 years. So I started over 20 years ago with our neighbors here at 1199, where I was the director of the strategic research department. So my background is in healthcare. I've worked with the Committee of Interns and Residents, also with SEIU, working with them. And then about 10 years ago, I went to the National Union, where I took what was a local adjunct organizing program in the DC area and made that national. So we took that little program and made it, ran elections and were implemented campaigns and local organizing in over 16 states, where we ran elections for 30,000 plus campus workers. So everybody from part-time, full-time faculty, tenured track faculty, service workers, professionals, everybody who is on a campus and does work. I've had the great privilege of helping folks get into the union, and I loved it, and I've learned a lot. I was also on the Bargaining for Common Good advisory committee, which I, really enjoyed working with K-12 and higher education locals around the country who are doing really exciting coalition work that is not unlike our New Deal for CUNY, and just really broadening what we can do both at the bargaining table and in the corridors of power to really help the powers that be understand what both we as workers, as retirees, as students, and other folks who are part of the campus community really need in terms of fully funded education, access to quality education, student debt relief, quality healthcare. All of those things are important to us. And in working with the PSC, I feel like it's, CUNY is one of the largest employers in New York City. And I think the direction, the shape that PSC, the things that PSC argues for really has the ability to impact the broader residents of New York City, not just in terms of who we represent and our students directly, but also in terms of the kind of employer that CUNY is. And so I think it's really important that the issues that we bring up, again, with CUNY at the bargaining table, but also at City Hall and in Albany, is really important, because elected leaders need to be pushed. Administrators need to be pushed, and I feel like, are the heart and soul of CUNY, and we really need to shape the direction of the university system. In addition to that, I'm always very proud to say that I cut my teeth on labor organizing when I was a public school teacher in Oakland, California. So I started off as a substitute teacher, and then I became a junior high teacher for at-risk students, and very proud of my time there, because I think the most memorable thing, it should be the students, and they are, but was really the union organizing. So I worked with the Oakland Education Association, which is an affiliate of NEA and the California Teachers Association. And in 1996, I went on strike for a month, and it was very formative for me. So very proud of that experience as well. I also, for 10 plus years, was a commissioner for New York City's Equal Employment Practices Commission. And that commission audits and helps with the policies that city agencies have around hiring, promotion, recruitment, retention. And I think what I've learned about that is that folks in a lot of our city agencies have the best of intentions, but it doesn't always materialize in practice. And so what we've seen, and what I've seen in the EEPC Commission, is that administrators will say some things that are very nice, but not implement them in practice. And so what we strive to do is bring to light some of these issues. And I just feel like that's the through line for my career, is actually helping people empower, see what working people really need to truly live better lives. So I'm just going to pause because that's a bit of rambling and see if there's anything more.
It sounds great, Melanie, and we're, very happy to have you. We welcome you to the PSC. It's a great organization. And I know as many of us as possible are going to look forward to meeting you in person. So thank you for taking time. I'm sure you're extremely busy for taking time to talk to us today. Let's take some minutes to go back to a Q&A for our two main speakers, Ruth and James. If you have a question, and please make it a question and not a speech, raise your Zoom hand and I will be happy to call on you. Okay. Everybody's quiet. Oh, John Highland. Can
Yeah, more okay, I'm clear now. Hi, everybody. Good to see everybody. Thanks, Ruth and James, for the reports. Very, very helpful. I have I guess it's a question, and I think it relates to both Ruth and James. I asked myself, why do labor unions do all this work on contracts and healthcare, et cetera, largely piecemeal, union by union, or institution by institution, rather than put considerable resources into building a collective fight on, pay and working conditions and healthcare and et cetera. It seems it basically doesn't make sense to me. Now, what I attribute that to is that we have like a employee mentality, but we don't have a class mentality. We don't seem to understand or think in terms that what happens to us is also happening to or will happen to hospital workers, home care workers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm interested in your thoughts or the thoughts of other people, in the meeting as to, number one, what can we do about it, basically? Okay, that's it.
Thanks,
Well,
John.
Oh, sorry,
Ruth,
please,
Ruth,
James.
you go first. You
Oh,
go
okay.
first.
I don't have a whole lot to say about that, except that this is the history of the US labor movement, which is that it's always been a highly decentralized phenomenon. And you probably know that, for example, the AFL-CIO is a federation of unions that do not necessarily have to adhere to very many directives from on high. They do what they want. They have a lot of autonomy. I'm sure James knows much more than I about the situation in New York, but we do collaborate with other unions in New York City in the public sector, actually. And so it doesn't always work out the way some of us on this call might hope, but there is an effort to do that at least, which I'm sure you want to say more about.
Thanks, Ruth. John, it's great to see you. I think your analysis is right, and it's very useful. In terms of the question, I think that there's a great deal. There's incentives for for labor leaders to imagine that they can do better by their members by negotiating something directly with their agency or their employer, than trying to stand shoulder to shoulder with and hold out and coordinate with other unions, which involves work and coalition building and trust. But I think also, John, that there may be more of the other happening than is immediately apparent. And I'll just give one example. So fundamentally, I think the direction that you're pointing is the right one. But it may be happening in ways or instances that may not be apparent. So just for instance, you know, we're part of New York State United Teachers, and you know, I have criticisms of NYSET, but one of the structural challenges of being in NYSET is that it's largely K through 12, even though SUNY and CUNY and the community colleges and NYSET community colleges are higher education. And so, you know, influencing that agenda of our statewide affiliate can be challenging. But I will say that when those of us who serve on the board at NYSET, for example, when we go and we say we're in a contract battle and we need you, right, our counterparts in the other NYSET locals to support us in that, they ask, how can we help? And so, for instance, when the NYSET Representative Assembly came to town in June, whenever that was, this past spring, we invited all the elected leadership from NYSET to come out to a rally for job security in relation to our contract in front of CUNY Central. And everybody came out. More NYSET, actually, there were more participants from you know, NYSET locals from around the state than our own PSC members there. Now, that's just a small instance, right? It's not really the kind of systematic building over time that you're describing, which, you know, I think you're really right to identify that as a weakness of so-called organized labor. But I just point that out to say that I think that there is nevertheless an affinity and a sensibility of solidarity that we haven't developed yet, but that when people are when they're asked, right, are willing to come out. And I had chapter presidents from across the state after that action say, thanking us, thank you for coming and asking us to come out to that action. It was really powerful. So maybe, you know, I think the direction you're pointing us is the right one. And at the same time, there are instances of solidarity and coalition building that are actually happening.
Thank you. Erwin Yelowitz.
Yes, for both our speakers, Ruth, I'm sure, can comment on the fact that this 6% that we have in private employment who unionized is well below what it was in the past. It probably is about what it was in 1900, and of course, well below the figures in the 1960s. But I also want to ask James about the number of non-union people in the PSC since Janus. As retirees, I think we go back a long way, and we remember that there were always non-union members or non-union people. In CUNY, they were fee payers. I don't know if their number is any larger than the number that you have now under Janus. So I think the union should try to organize everybody. There's no question about that. But I just wonder whether there is some irreducible number of people who, even under agency fee, refuse to join the union, and whether we have to recognize that.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to be brief because I've talked a lot. Erwin, thanks for the question, and it is always good to see you. Yes, when we could collect agency fees, we had the luxury of not having to ask ourselves too hard about who is that irreducible, you know, number of folks who were not going to get to join the union. We have not seen dramatic decreases in union membership. what we've seen is that it's hard to keep up with the churn, but not that people are affirmatively making decisions to leave the union or refuse to sign up for the union. It's more often the case that folks have not been reached or asked in the first place. The one thing that's a trend that I think your question points to that I think is relatively new, it has become so hard for CUNY employees, not that it was ever easy, but it's become harder and harder for CUNY employees to live where we work or anywhere near where we work. And I don't need to tell you guys, the cost of living in New York is through the roof. The rent is too damn high. Grocery prices are, everything is going up and up and up in the city. And so for the first time that a lot of us can remember, folks have, when in a membership conversation, are saying, I would like to join the union someday, but I can't afford it now. I can't afford it, even at 1%. Now, we continue to have the conversation. Of course, our response to that is not disrespectfully, but to say, because we know what people are up against, but to say you can't afford not to join the union, right? The union is the thing that's going to raise your wages and benefits and, et cetera. So, we don't accept at face value if people say I can't afford to join the union for 1%, but a surprising number of non-members cite that as the reason why they are reluctant or opposed to joining. Thanks, Erwin.
Diane Mena?
Yeah, hi, James. I just wanted to ask you, when you're sitting across from them at the table, does it seem to you that they really understand the fact that having sufficient faculty, staff, services, and even a physical plant that's not going to fall down on your head drives enrollment and retention, and that without those, that's why it's like a spiral.
Mm-hmm.
And they're really a huge cause of the fact that there is no enrollment.
Yeah. Diane, thanks. And folks should know that bargaining sessions are open to anybody who's a PSC member. I know a lot of folks in this Zoom room have attended a bargaining session in this round. We've had something like 450 PSC members attend bargaining sessions. It's been amazing. And so you can kind of see for yourself and gauge version of what Diane is asking about. They do not understand in a fundamental way what you are describing, which is, on the one hand, they say that they want to recruit and retain students and increase graduation rates and, prepare students for the workforce and create thoughtful citizens in a pluralist democracy. However, the employment model that they are addicted to undermines that, as you've said. And so we continue to make the case, as you've said, that treating the employees well, with decent benefits, with decent job security, goes directly to having a stable workforce and a relatively well compensated workforce contributes to those outcomes, right, that they want to see on the ledger. I don't think that they are stupid. I think they understand that equation, but the constraints that they have accepted and internalized for themselves, right? The dramatic shift, not only to adjunctification, but also to kind of maintaining various forms of managerial control. They're absolutely, I shouldn't say absolutely, they're deeply wedded to those structures. So look, I mean, we've done an amazing job as a union over time in continuing, with each round at making inroads on those priority areas. And I think we're going to continue to do that in this round. I've seen it already. But this administration took all the wrong lessons from the pandemic, which was, their lesson that they took from it was, we need more managerial discretion. We need to make fewer commitments to people, right? We need to be able to hire, fire, move people around kind of at will. And it's hugely problematic.
Okay, thanks, James. Manfred Philip?
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, thank you for your presentation and all the good work that you're doing. It's really inspiring. My question is about the city and the state budgets for CUNY. How does CUNY fare in comparison to SUNY? I noticed that the state is doing an awful lot of advertising for SUNY, and the governor declared one of the SUNY units to be the premier in higher educational institutions in New York State. They don't say much about CUNY. How do we do on a financial basis? Are we doing as well per student as SUNY is doing, or are we doing worse, or better?
Yeah. Okay, Manfred, thanks. So at the state level, we've seen increases in CUNY funding since Hochul took office. And we've seen some interesting things kind of that are maybe less kind of headline, like for example, TAP reform has allowed part-time students, incarcerated students to take classes at CUNY, all to the good. But there has been a serious contraction in that increase over the 3 kind of budget cycles since Hochul has been office. So year 1, major new investments, $240 million new dollars in operating aid, over $1 billion in new capital funding, et cetera. Year 2, a little over $100 million in new, operating aid. And then year 3, she proposed flat funding in her executive budget and even a few cuts that she was going to make the state legislature sort of quote unquote buy back through the budget process. And where we landed was, around $30-40 million north of the previous year in terms of operating budget. So we've grown, unlike under Cuomo, which was like death by 1,000 cuts, et cetera. Your question is about in relation to SUNY. We have tended to fare around, kind of like a 60-40 split, so that, the public higher education pie gets roughly split 60-40. And we keep fighting and pushing back at that and saying, CUNY has basically been underfunded and left behind basically since the fiscal crisis, to be, really accurate about it. But there's a little bit of be careful what you wish for, not in terms of the proportion, but in terms of the strings that get attached to SUNY funding. And I don't want to go on at great length, but just to stop on this point, which is, you mentioned, I think, sort of most favored campus kind of status. Governor Hochul is much more familiar with the SUNY system, and I think we've helped to educate her. And I think, not to give too much credit, but the Chancellery and others have tried to educate her on what the particular role that the CUNY system plays, not just in the city, but in the whole state. But she knows SUNY a lot more than she knows CUNY. But as a result of that, she's also interested in a kind of model for, I'll just call it tiering of the SUNY system, that we are very leery of in the PSC. So she would like she has a kind of like, Research One model for a few of the SUNY campuses, and the rest of them can kind of like, filter and falter and really, I mean, frankly, be underfunded. And the chancellor of the SUNY system, John King, is in lockstep with that vision. It's a very dangerous, I mean, the UUP, the SUNY faculty union, they're fighting for their lives on some of those campuses, the Ag and Tech, the Cobble Skills, the Buffalo States, the Potsdams, they're really struggling because there isn't a vision of equitable funding and trying to bring students back. So we don't want that, most favored campus stature. I mean, the tiering of our university under the Goldstein era was already, pretty extreme. And I think if that were the model, if there were strings attached to CUNY funding, we need to fight against that. Before we get to Mike and Marcia, I'll just plug that some of you are aware that PSC is really supporting a bill to threaten the nonprofit exemption, nonprofit status that Columbia and NYU enjoy of not paying any property taxes. They're two of the largest real estate landholders in the city of New York. And what the Repair Act would do at the state level would be to threaten that nonprofit status for Columbia and NYU, because the city currently forgoes over $300 million a year in tax revenue, real estate tax revenue from Columbia and NYU, because they don't have to pay anything, even though in real estate taxes, even though they, of course, enjoy and benefit from being located in our dear city and from our city services. So, you know, that could be a multi-year process, but I hope that you all will tune in and get involved in the push to pass the Repair Act, which is carried on the Senate side by John Liu and on the Assembly side by Zoran Mamdani. Sorry, I went on too long.
Thank you so much.
Mike Frank and then Marcia.
James, you mentioned you're the PSC representative to the Municipal Labor Committee. Two-part question, and that you're advocating for more transparency, and I assume for more democracy also in process and decision-making there. Could you tell us exactly what measures are you advocating for? And second part of the question, would it not be more powerful to do that publicly, and so that the entire public sector workforce in New York City could understand how the Municipal Labor Committee operates and what changes need to be made?
Yeah, Mike, thank you. A perceptive question. So, I mean, the public part of this that I'm always reluctant to do is to try to attack my counterparts in other unions publicly. That's just always a dicey thing for any union president to do, but I don't have any problem stating publicly what I state within the MLC meetings, which is that we need processes for things that are such high stakes, like the rollout of a new healthcare plan for 250,000 workers. We need the opportunity as representatives from the MLC to go to our members and to be able for our members to understand, right? Whether it's retirees or actives, to understand what's actually inside of those healthcare plans before we're asked to cast a vote. And I know that my counterparts from other labor unions feel similarly about that. So what I've said within MLC, and of course, I'm happy to say it anywhere out loud, which is the MLC needs to avoid a situation with a contractor, whether it's Aetna or Emblem or any of these other insurance companies, that effectively consigns us to a kind of a non-disclosure agreement, right? Where we can't talk about what it is that we're voting on. So at a very basic level, and I think that a lot of labor leaders in MLC are a little bit once bitten, twice shy. They don't want to go down that same road again that we went down with Medicare Advantage, where we had to kind of take it on faith that, of course, the Aetna plan was going to be the best thing since sliced bread, and it was going to have silver sneakers, and it was going to have all these other bells and whistles. And then, but we couldn't talk about it, and we couldn't kick the tires until after we were already asked as leaders on the MLC to cast votes. That's not a sustainable position. And so I think there are a lot more MLC leaders who feel similarly.
Marcia?
Hi, I wondered, Ruth Milken's information and how could the fact that young people are more pro-union, how, and is there a way that could be used to bolster our positions, whether it's in bargaining or in healthcare or whatever? In other words, if there's a trend, if there's an atmosphere, a wave, we have to use, how can we use it? I want to use it. I want to either bring, what's that law that was taken away? I keep forgetting the name of when they took away dues collection. What was the name of that thing?
It wasn't a law, it was an earlier court decision, but anyway, to bring back agency fee, for example, yeah.
Yeah, but what was the name of that thing?
Does anyone remember? I can't remember the name of the earlier decision that Janice overturned, but
I mean, to bring back that stuff, to have a put,
or
how, in other words, how can we use the pro-unions sentiment in the country? You know, that 60% or whatever think unions
70.
think.
Yeah.
How can we use that? That's
Well,
the,
that is a big question, and I don't really, have a full answer, but I'll just say a couple things. It's a great question. Look, what's happened is, and I think it's part of a broader radicalization of young people that we saw, for example, in the Bernie Sanders presidential campaigns and Occupy Wall Street and other movements that have emerged in the last couple decades. There is a new generation of young people who are highly educated and facing very problematic economic conditions themselves, right? High levels of student debt, ridiculous housing costs, precarious employment, all the rest of it. You all know this, but that has generated this surge of radicalization and interest in labor organizing. And they have been doing a lot of organizing of the unorganized. They're less involved in things like legal challenges to things like getting rid of, Janice, that I haven't seen much of. But there is a whole set of people who have entered. I mean, I don't know how old you are, Malini, but she's not as young as most of the ones I'm talking about, but is part of this whole phenomenon herself. And, we're seeing that all over the country. One of the issues is that this is not true of James, obviously, I think it's not true of PSC more generally, but the leaders of organized labor tend to be rather advanced in age, kind of more like the people on this call, and don't have this outlook. And also because of having been beaten down for so many years, have a kind of siege mentality and a very cautious approach to taking on the big challenges that the labor movement faces. And so there is a kind of gap, a sort of generation gap, and it's very unfortunate. But I mean, the good news is that those people, many of them are moving into staff positions and organizing positions, and are reinvigorating, our movement. But there's some resistance to that too from on high. And, and for them, it's part of a bigger agenda. They're not just interested in labor. They're interested in a lot of other progressive issues, including, I don't know what the view is in this room, but including protesting US support for Israel and Gaza, that kind of stuff, which has created more resistance to them in some quarters and, the top leadership of unions. So it's a complicated set of challenges, but the good news is, yeah, the public is on our side. The law is not. So it's not just Janice, but all the ways in which the National Labor Relations Act has been, captured by employer interests in various ways. So I can't really say more than that, but there's lots to read about this if you're interested, and I'd be glad to talk, or email or whatever offline, outside this meeting about it if anyone wants to.
Thank
Please
you.
don't hesitate to write me, all of you, not just Marcia.
Thank you, Ruth. We're going to take two more questions. I see somebody with the initial D, but I don't see the name. So
Donna Gill, it says, yeah.
Donna Gill, hi, Donna. You're
Hello,
next.
everyone. Yes, thank you. Thank you, James and Ruth, and welcome, Malini. I just wanted to make a statement to let everyone know, to remind everyone actually to renew your membership in the PSC, because membership is from September to August, and we all need to renew our membership. And I know, we get reminded of it or we don't think about it, but that's another way to improve union density with our chapter. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Okay, you took part of my little talk. But we can't say it often enough, right? That we have not been able to break that 3,000 person mark. And so we need you to join. Peter Reynes, you're the last question.
Yes, thanks to James and Ruth. I wanted to particularly ask James, I know the PSC is active in organizing in Nassau and New York City. Hopefully, I pray, I'm not religious, but I pray Kamala wins this election. Otherwise, I'm going to emigrate somewhere. We need to win back some of these House seats in New York and Nassau. And I'm wondering, NYSED has deep pockets and the AFT has deep pockets. Is the PSC in touch with those two organizations to, to advertise and to push in Nassau and New York? I haven't seen any ads by labor groups to push the Democratic alternative in these seats.
Yeah, we are involved with both NYSET and AFT, Peter, and I'm not sure about advertising, which I think is what you were asking about. But in terms of like boots on the ground, our members have already been going out to Long Island and to some of the upstate counties that are in play, some of the Hudson Valley areas. NYSET has been very aggressive, I think very encouragingly aggressive. They even got a bus. They're very proud of their bus. They think a bus brings all people out, and maybe they're right. It's got a slogan on the side of the bus that says something like "common ground over chaos," and so you can go out on the NYSET bus, and so they're pushing for Swazi. They're in Hudson County. They're working for Josh Riley in Sullivan County, and of course in some other farther upstate regions that our members have a harder time getting to. But they're, in fact, I have a hard time getting them to pay attention to anything else right now when I call them. So they're really all in on those congressional races.
Thank you. All right, Dave Cuddlechuck, Peter was going to be the last question, but we'll give you your minute. You have to unmute yourself, or somebody has to unmute Dave Cuddlechuck.
Yeah, Peter, I've already gone out to Long Island and worked with some of the Long Island PSC chapters and retiree chapters. I'm going to put in the note that I'll send you the email for Ken Ulrich, ULRIC, who is coordinating those activities in the Long Island area for the 3 seats that we lost last election. I'll put it up for everybody there.
Great.
It's a very nice arrangement. Okay.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you
you.
very much. Well, thank you so much, Ruth, for coming back to talk to us. I know you have a very busy schedule. And of course, James, thank you as well. We're going to move the agenda. Is Malini still here? I wanted to thank her for giving us a little preview of her wonderful sounding CV, and we look forward to working with her. Okay, so I'm going to ask your indulgence and take a few minutes to talk about the state of our chapter. We heard about the state of the national picture, and we heard from James about our union. I'm going to talk a little bit about our chapter, your chapter. And I'm going to cut this. I'm going to cut this a bit so that we have time to hear from Debbie and from Michael. I should have said this at the beginning of the meeting. I'm assuming everybody knows my name is Ann Friedman. I'm the chair of the chapter. I work very closely with our vice chair, Diane, and our secretary, Bonnie, to run the chapter, and of course with our wonderful executive council. And our staff member is Ava Farkas, and she brings her youthful spirit and optimism when we sometimes get a little negative, and she reminds us that we can make a difference by working together. I'd like to extend a special welcome to new retirees. And our chapter is unique. It's not just that we are retired, but that we have members from every possible chapter and every possible title and every possible field in our chapter. That makes us unique. People bring their experiences, their working experiences in different parts of CUNY, And I think it makes a very for a very rich perspective on things. The real strength in any chapter is in its members. And as I said before, we are very close to 3,000 members, and we really have to reach that mark. And Diane Mena heads up our membership operations. So we especially have to get to our part-timers. That is the hardest, there's the hardest body to recruit. We have our own web page, and Bonnie Nelson is going to take a minute or two to give us a gloss of what that looks like. Bill Friedheim organized and set up this web page when he was feeling better. Bonnie's taken it over, and she's going to show us what it looks like if you haven't been to it.
Well, we don't have very much time, so very quickly, you can get to it by going to psc-cuny.org/retirees. And it starts off with some really nice pictures from our luncheon last June. So if you didn't go, you can see how much fun we had. And we are planning on more luncheons in the future. We list upcoming chapter events. And what I think is the best part is if you go to past events, which is on this page, you'll find all the previous chapter meetings that we've had going back to 2020 when the pandemic started and we went to Zoom. And all of these meetings have a link to the video of the meeting. So if you missed any of our meetings, and some of them were really, really fascinating and topics of great importance to all of us, you can see the video of the meeting. You haven't missed it. That is the great advantage of Zoom. We're not together in person, but those of you around the country can join us, and we can all look back and see what happened at past meetings. We also have a link to our past newsletters. That's Turning the Page. The current issue is September, October, and you can read it in full here, and all of the past issues as well of our newsletter. They're all online. There's greetings from the chapter chair, and if you link to, there's a link to what's happening with our healthcare page. This is, you can go back and find out all the issues that have been happening with Medicare Advantage, etc. There's also a link to that myths and facts document that James was talking about. And you can, get the latest updates, if any, in our fight against Medicare Advantage. And that's pretty much all I think I need to say. You can explore it at your leisure by going to PSC-CUNY /retirees.
And you can pay your dues
Right.
online.
Okay, thank you, Bonnie, and thank you for picking up. And the website is really up to date. And very often when you have a question or a concern, you can certainly write to us, but you can find the answer on the webpage. Well, everybody knows that we've spent so much of our time and energy around the healthcare crisis, and things have quieted down for a while, and we're waiting for a ruling on the city's appeal. I'm feeling very optimistic that we're going to come out as winners on this one. But just because it's been quiet doesn't mean that we don't have to be prepared. And one of the things on the website that is extremely useful and was created by Bonnie is guidelines for looking at a supplemental health insurance plan should we need to. Hopefully we won't need to, but should we need to. Looking back at 2023-24, I went to the website, And I was reminded of some of the wonderful meetings that we had, and particularly most of those were actually presented by our own members. We had a very successful meeting on living arrangements for seniors, given by Jim Cohen, and Jim's going to follow up next year with a second presentation. We learned about artificial intelligence, impacts of noise on mental and physical well-being, migration as economic imperialism, the yin and yang of the physical urban environment with architect Alan Feigenberg and city planner Tom Agnotti. We had programs on the new McCarthyisms, and we had a program on the climate crisis in action with Rebecca Brett-Spies and Cecilia McCall. I'm really, amazed when I look back and see how much we have done, how much we've done together, and how important our members have been in presenting these very interesting and educative chapter presentations. Looking forward, we had a very successful luncheon. And we are talking about the possibility of another luncheon in January. We don't know if that'll work out, but we'll definitely have one in June. We also recognize that people want to have the opportunity to get together in person. So we are going to dip our feet into the waters of hybrid meetings. And I think December, we're going to try to have a hybrid meeting where you can attend in person, or you can attend online. We would like to have more opportunities where we bring people together, perhaps tours. We didn't have any tours this year, but in the past we had a tour of Chinatown. What else am I forgetting? The other one. Anyway, as I said, our strength is in our members, and we've been reminded many times, please, you should have received in the mail an invoice to join. I think that's the preferred way to fill that out and send it back. That's what I'm told by the membership department. So it's great working with all of you, and we go forward with another year of programs and keeping a watchful eye on what's happening with the healthcare situation. And with that, we have Debbie Bell is here, as she usually is, to give us a very brief update on healthcare, and then we'll hear from Michael Foley from the Welfare Fund. So Debbie, are you here?
I am here.
Okay, here's Debbie.
Hello, everyone. Happy
April.
October. Very briefly, there really is not a lot going on except for one important thing, which is November is open enrollment month. So if for some reason you want to change your health plan, that is the month to do it. The one thought is that because senior care, which is the Medicare supplemental plan that most PSC retirees are in, the court has allowed senior care to restore the $15 copays for most outpatient services. It may be that you want to think about, is there another health plan offering that might not cost me so much in copays? There is on the Employee Benefits Program website, there is a somewhat cryptic description of the different plans. I say cryptic because I looked at it again this morning. There's just not that much information. Most of them are Medicare Advantage plans. Senior care is the one big not Medicare Advantage. The other thing is for retirees who are under 65 and therefore covered by the city's plans for active employees, the same as active employees. An important piece of news vis-a-vis the open enrollment period is that if you are currently in Cigna as an under 65 retiree, the city is no longer going to be offering Cigna effective January 1 of 25. So you will have to find an alternative plan. I will note there is a Cigna Arizona supplemental plan for retirees. That is not affected. What's affected is the Cigna plan for active employees. And that's going to end effective December 31st. So if you're covered by that currently, do your best to find a new plan. And that's only for pre-65 retirees. I wanted to make a correction from my comments at the last meeting. The lawsuit that resulted in Judge Frank enjoining senior care from forcing people to pay copays, which he this past summer then lifted again and said, okay, you fixed the contract, now you can charge copays. That lawsuit had more issues in it when I went back to look, and that lawsuit is continuing before Judge Frank. I am not, I haven't had a chance to really dig into what the lawsuit was about. But I will do that when I can. As Anne said, the other two lawsuits about Medicare Advantage, one of which is the city is appealing the appellate court ruling. Right. Bonnie says Medicare Advantage is not a supplemental plan. It replaces Medicare. That is true. It replaces traditional Medicare, which is part of our objection. And yes, you can keep Medicare and be on a Medicare, not a Medicare Advantage supplemental plan, but a Medicare supplemental plan. So you can't go into a Medicare Advantage plan because it replaces traditional Medicare plus the supplemental plan. I'm sorry for the confusion. The lawsuit where this appellate court upheld Judge Frank's ruling, lower court ruling, that the city could not force all 65 plus retirees into Aetna Medicare Advantage, has been appealed by the city, and the oral arguments in that case are being presented at the Court of Appeals November 9th. There is another lawsuit which the city lost at the appellate level, which has been earlier, which it has appealed to the Court of Appeals, but nothing is scheduled yet. And that is the lawsuit which goes back to when this all started, where retirees objected legally to the fact that the city could charge for a Medicare supplemental plan like senior care.
I thought that was the one that was being scheduled.
No, it's the other one. I mean, maybe, no, it's the other one. We'll get this straight. It's the HIP HMO rate relationship that they have not agreed to hear at this yet, as far as I know. I mean, maybe they haven't said no, but they haven't scheduled things. The other point to make is that discussions between the city and the MLC about a replacement plan for GHI Blue Cross, which most of our active members and pre-65 retirees are in, have come to a standstill. So nothing is going to change on that front for the foreseeable future. And given how long these things take to implement, even if they were to pick discussions up tomorrow, which they won't, given the chaos at City Hall, I would expect nothing would change probably until the end of 2025. So the array of choices for active employees and pre-65 retirees will remain the same, except that Cigna will no longer be available among those choices. And someone in the chat is saying that the lawsuit on the copays hearing is scheduled for October 17th at 9:30 a.m. Thank you for that. That's it, Anne. Dave
Okay,
has a question.
Thank you, Debbie. Dave, yes. Dave Cuddleshock.
Okay, Debbie, you said that, it's November 9th is when the, arguments would go to the Court of Appeals, but that's a Saturday. So I wondered if that was the correct date.
Maybe not. That was the date that was given to me 2 weeks ago. So it is unlikely that that's the correct date. I will check on that again.
All right.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you.
Thank
Please.
you for pointing that out.
Okay.
Perhaps it's November 19th, because I know that, because Myra is noting in the chat that the
Open hearing.
so that's not the appellate court, that would be the Court of Appeals.
Court of Appeals, Tuesday,
Right, so
November
maybe it's the
19th.
19th, the person just didn't put the one in front of it.
Thank you.
Maybe I didn't write down the one, that's also.
Thank you.
possible.
Love to hear it.
So the 19th.
Good.
Thank you, Dave, for pointing that out. Thank you, Debbie. Michael Foley, we have a little time left.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Ann. Hi, everybody. Great presentation from Ruth. Always a pleasure to be here talking with retirees. I learned so much during these meetings, and I hope hopefully I can pass along some useful information. My name is Michael Foley. I'm the Director of Communications for the PSC CUNY Welfare Fund. As you hopefully know, we provide your supplemental drug, dental, hearing, and vision benefits, and we administer things like your long-term care plan and your catastrophic major medical plan if you have those policies. To reiterate one quick thing that Debbie mentioned, it is open enrollment next month. It's a good time to evaluate your benefits, see if there's any changes you want to make. One of the more common enrollment changes that people do is switch dental plans, Guardian versus Delta. We can help you with that process. It's a great chance to sort of evaluate what is working for you and what you may want to make changes with. So keep in mind that open enrollment next month. Let me share my screen real quick with this chart, which some of you may have seen before. It's cold and flu season coming up, and it's you'll be thinking about your vaccines and whatnot. I just want to remind everyone the process of getting those crucial vaccines as we head into winter. For retirees who are under age 65, I know it's instinctual to go to the pharmacy and take out your pharmacy card, your CVS card or your SilverScript card. But if you're under age 65, it's your basic healthcare card, such as GHI, to take out at the pharmacy. And that gets you your COVID-19 vaccine, your flu, pneumonia, and RSV. For those of you retired and over age 65, it's two cards that come into play. Take out your Medicare card if you're getting your COVID-19 vaccine, your flu vaccine, or your pneumonia vaccine. It is, in fact, your SilverScript card if you're talking about RSV, shingles, and Tdap. It can be confusing at the counter. Oftentimes, the person at the counter is ill-informed or doesn't pass along the right information or just blankly tells you, sorry, it's not covered. Please just carry every card with you and don't take a no when you're at the counter. Just keep taking cards out and have them run the card until it works, or refer to this chart. And that will speed up the process along. One thing I do want to touch on is the Paxlovid situation. Paxlovid, as you know, is the only FDA-approved treatment for COVID-19. If anyone's been unfortunate enough to get COVID in the last year, hopefully you've been able to utilize a program set up by the federal government and Pfizer, the manufacturer of Paxlovid, that can provide a one course or possibly more of Paxlovid at little to no cost. If anyone is concerned about that, please give me a call. I'm going to put my direct line in the chat before I leave, and we can go over all this. But there is a process for obtaining Paxlovid at little to no cost. It involves joining this program set up by Pfizer, and it's a little convoluted. Again, a lot of misinformation is running around out there. It all tends to do with who knows what when you reach them on the phone. We've tried to distill this down to the most accurate information, but please give me a call if you have any concerns about that. I'm happy to take any questions. Julie, you've got your hand up. Shoot.
Sorry, this isn't a question, and thanks, Mike. To those of you on the call, I'm a brand new retiree, and I just wanted to mention, in light of your comments about vaccines for those of us over 65, and I don't know if there's any other brand new retirees. I went to get my COVID and flu vaccines at my local pharmacy the other day after having my annual physical, and the office of my doctor had some trouble understanding the relationship of my Medicare to my GHI, and I didn't quite understand why they were having trouble. When I got to the pharmacy, they said you're on Medicare as a secondary and GHI as a primary. And they gave me a number to call for something called the BCRC, the Benefits Coordination Recovery Center with Medicare. And I called them, and it turned out that I guess because Medicare coverage started August 1st, but I was still an active employee till August 28th, in their system, they had.
Excuse me, Julie, I don't want to interrupt, but I am interrupting. I think that would be best asked to Michael one-on-one, right?
Okay, I just wanted to give a heads up to anyone else
Yeah.
who might have run into this
Well,
problem.
and they've got it backwards because Medicare
No,
is.
no, I know, and I've fixed it now, but I
Okay.
just wanted to give a heads up in case anyone else had just run into this. If I hadn't gone to the
thanks.
pharmacy, I wouldn't have discovered it, and I would have just gotten a lot of denials in the mail from my physician.
Well,
Thank you,
for
Julie.
raising
And
it.
that's what's so great about these meetings is that we can all share information, share experiences, and pass along such great tips, because that's what's wonderful about this retiree chapter group, because I can't tell you the number of times that people have just learned new things and have come away from these meetings armed with that kind of knowledge.
Good.
Any other questions, any concerns? Great. Okay. I'm going to drop my direct phone number in the chat. Please do not hesitate to call me. Here at the Welfare Fund, we pick up the phone, we answer emails. We'll do the best we can to help you with issues that are even unrelated to the Welfare Fund. But it's always a great pleasure to talk with you all.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for being with us. And welcome to the retiree chapter, Julie, and to all the other new retirees. I should have said this earlier, but I want to thank Eileen Moran for taking notes. We always have somebody taking notes at these meetings and writing up the meeting in our wonderful Turning the Page newsletter. The next meeting is going to be on November 11th, 11/11. Normally, the meeting would have been on November 4th, but that is the day before Election Day. We didn't think that the day before Election Day would be the best time to have a meeting with people doing last minute get out the vote and thinking about the election. At that meeting, the topics are going to be Medicare and Social Security. We have two expert speakers. Barbara Caress, some of you know, is going to talk to us about Medicare, and Nancy Altman, who is the president of Social Security Works, is going to speak with us. And that's going to be on Zoom, all remote. And hopefully in December, we'll be going to a hybrid meeting. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for your questions, your comments, and your patience. And make sure that you use some of the retiree time that you have in getting out the vote activities. Actually, Nancy Romer just texted me, if you're interested in doing postcards, writing postcards to Democratic voters in Pennsylvania, email Nancy. It's nancyromer@gmail.com, or go on to the PSC website. There are plenty of opportunities for getting out the vote activities. So stay healthy, stay well, and we'll see you next month.